Hi everyone, my name is Natasha Ofman. I am a marketing account manager at ICF. ICF is a consulting firm that consults in many different verticals, one of which is energy efficiency, and that is the part of the business where I sit. At ICF, I am a community outreach and events manager for NYC Accelerator, which is a city program that's designed to deliver technical assistance to help building owners reduce carbon emissions from their buildings through energy efficiency upgrades. We're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of all of that in a bit, but I'll just say a little bit about my background and how I wound up in this role. I actually started at ICF as an intern in a totally different part of the company. And after several years, I found myself gravitating toward wanting to work in sustainability. I started making calls, sending emails, and I found myself in this role. We'll dive into, I think we're gonna have some questions that gets more into like what my day-to-day looks like, so I'll leave it at that. But a fun fact about me is that I'm a sucker for farmers markets. So on Saturdays, you're most likely to find me working at the farmers market. We'll talk about that a little bit later too.
Thank you, Natasha. Mike?
Great. That's a great intro. Hey everyone, my name is Mike Ilardi. I work at a company called, formerly it was called the Climate Service. It was a little startup. It got bought by a much bigger company called S&P Global, which some of you might know. It has a big ratings agency. That's one arm. It also has a very big data intelligence, kind of market intelligence arm. It's called Market Intelligence. That's the part that's more closely aligned with what the Climate Service does, which is climate risk analytics. I'm happy to talk more about that. My role is Director of Business Development, which basically means we focus on how to essentially sell more of these climate and sustainability products. I focus primarily on working with financial institutions for the overarching goal, basically how it connects to like a green job or a sustainable mission, is to embed climate data, and in particular climate risk data, into as many financial decisions as possible. We can talk a little bit more about exactly what that means tactically, et cetera. But my job is essentially to figure out, okay, who has a need for this information? How do our products basically map to their need, segment the market, look at different personas, try to figure out how we would essentially reach out to them, which at a big company is much easier than at a small company, which I'm sure a lot of you have experience with. And yeah, that's basically the nature of the job. Just a little bit on journey. That's a great point. I know that we'll get a little bit more into it, but mine has been pretty meandering, and so I'm happy to talk about any of the kind of points on that journey. But I knew that I wanted to work in sustainability / I don't think I would have put a climate label on it specifically 10 or 12 years ago, but I had this idea that you could work in the for-profit space, and if it wasn't clear, I'd absolutely work for a for-profit, but work on kind of socially beneficial issues. I think I had a thesis that was like a little friendlier toward capitalism earlier on. I think I've gotten less friendly toward the framework over time, but have kind of made peace with it, but not framework, but system. But anyway, kind of working backwards, it's like I work here now, of course. I worked at another startup right before this as head of client engagement function. I worked in management consulting briefly, and then grad school, and then earlier in my career, brief stint in impact investing, worked in software sales for a while, and also worked in food service for a while. So very happy to talk about any point in that journey. Fun fact, I've lived in, I think, 17 apartments at last count over the last decade or so.
Wow. All right, Annie.
Well, my name is Annie Gala. I'm the Director of Marketing at PowerFlex. I can confidently say I have not lived in that many apartments.
That's good.
So the bar has definitely been set in that capacity. PowerFlex is a renewable energy solutions provider focused on the commercial and industrial space. We partner with customers in order to make going green and hitting their sustainability goals as easy as possible. You can see some of our projects at some targets, at LAX, if you're flying do things, especially with how much time we all spend at work, we want to do things that make us feel good. I'm originally from New York, but I actually just spent the last 5.5 years over on the West Coast. I am back officially as of the beginning of December and really excited to hit the ground running at an event like this where I can talk about how great it is to work in sustainability, even if it's not within the STEM field. I will kind of directly compete with you a little bit here.
Please don't.
In just like the amount of movement. My partner and I just finished up about 2.5-ish back and forths across the country in 22. So we hit something like 25 states in a matter of 10 months. Lived out of the car, had to move every month. It was an experience for sure.
Very cool.
Thank you so much for those introductions. So you can tell we have a couple of nomads sitting next to us, right? The term meandering was used a couple of times, so that actually kind of segues into my first question, right? So, right, if you're meandering, you need to have some guideposts. You need to have a North Star of some kind. So, I'll let whomever, feels the urge to answer my question first, but, what were those guideposts? What kept you on the ball with getting into your industry, with pivoting into your industry?
I'm happy to hop in first. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I graduated college. My background in education is in English education, and I spent a year or two doing student teaching, and then a year out in New York City public schools, and very quickly, not a knock against the school system, but very clearly decided that that was not how I wanted to spend my time. So I started to sort of figure out what it was I did want to do. I worked at a law firm for a while. I definitely did not want to do white collar litigation. I ended up working at Macmillan Publishing, and at the time, Twitter was, I hate to age myself this way, but Twitter was not really a thing back then. It was definitely not something that organizations were using as a customer service outlet. So at the time, the publisher that I was working for was involved in a big ebook lawsuit between Amazon and Apple, and I led the charge in really collecting more of that customer service information and the conversations that were happening between authors and readers on Twitter, and would report this stuff back over to our executive team to say, hey, our messaging is harsh and all of our readers are saying it. Not only our readers are saying it, but the authors that we want to support and are fighting this legal battle for are kind of also having some opposite things to say based on what we're trying to do. And that's really where the marketing bug sort of bit me, and I decided to use in tandem my education background in teaching executive teams, small businesses, large businesses, organizations as a whole, best practices as far as marketing was concerned. So really remaining helpful and remaining a true educator is sort of where I started, and that's kind of been my North Star, and really making sure I'm explaining, the value of PowerFlex to our customers and the value of PowerFlex to people who are looking to work there. Just remaining helpful and remaining connected.
Thanks, Annie.
Yeah, I think for me, I always wanted to have a career where I felt like I was doing something productive, like I was providing some sort of service or good that was helping society in one way or another. And for a while, that wasn't defined. It was pretty open. I found myself working in public health. I started my career doing strategic communications consulting for federal health agencies, such as the National Institutes of Health. And while it was interesting and sort of STEM tangential, my job was to communicate the research and make that understandable for a lay audience. It was just not my thing. I was not loving the content of my job. I knew it was helping people, but I wasn't interested. I wasn't eager to read these studies. And I started introspecting, what do I mean, and asking myself to dig deeper and think about what do I mean by, like, what do I care about, what do I enjoy, and how can I find that niche where I can do this social good. And I realized that I wanted to work in sustainability. I feel like I haven't reached my full goal yet. I'm halfway there. It's a journey. It's a continuous journey. I have lots of years left in me. But when I started doing that introspection, I started seeking out what are companies that are working within sustainability, what are different types of sustainability work, what resources do I have available to me, doing a lot of research in my spare time. And so as I briefly mentioned earlier, I for personal reasons, wanted to move back to New York, and I found that there was a position within the company that I was in related to energy efficiency. And this was back in 2019 when I was starting to look to make the switch. And I want to say that decarbonization was not really part of the vocabulary. And even in the short 3 years that I've been in this industry, I've seen what a change there has been around that. It's been fascinating. And ultimately that was how I made the switch. I listened to my gut. I was able to make the transition, get the job, had to go through a crash course in energy efficiency and New York building stock. And it's been a really interesting journey. We'll talk a little bit more about the day-to-day and what that means, but I think the goalpost really was, finding what fits your interests and your skills.
I guess for me, there are two things that come to mind when you ask about guideposts or guardrails or goalposts, whichever term we want to use. And it's actually not even really that I don't think I was guardrailed in many ways enough. So there are two things that I want to focus on. One would be specificity of goal. And so you were saying, like, I'm halfway to my goal. I'm really curious to hear more about what that goal is and how you define that goal. I don't think that I know I didn't. When I reflect on my journey, I didn't define my goal very specifically at the start. I had a fairly generic goal, and unsurprisingly, the outcome was also fairly generic. So the example is, at some point when I was working in tech sales, however many years out of college, living in the Bay Area, which was really interesting. I was learning more than I had been when I was living in Chicago and working in restaurants. I was like, my goal had been at that point very generally, I want to get professional experience. My post-college plans hadn't panned out. I thought I was going to do the Peace Corps. I decided not to do it for a number of reasons. I was supposed to leave. I had a departure date, etc. Those plans went awry, so I said, okay, I have to pivot. And it was a great way for me to get a base professional skill set. But when I decided that I wanted to do something that was a little bit more intentional, something more values-based, I decided broadly, and living in San Francisco at the time that I was, it was kind of like the hub of impact investing. Really felt like it was where it started. I don't know if it's where it started, but I know that a lot of the kind of old guard, the stalwarts, lived out there. And it just seemed very present. It was part of that ecosystem. And I said, I really want to break into that space. That was my goal. And it took me like 3 or so years. And I did. I broke into it. But then when I got into it, I realized and it was a great organization, but it wasn't really the type of organization that I wanted to be at. It wasn't in the type of role that I wanted to be at within the industry. And I realized at that point, oh man, like I had defined that goal so broadly that I got an outcome that actually met the goal, but I realized it wasn't what I'd wanted to do. And so I wound up going to grad school. I got an MBA. I did another graduate degree, which was like the tiny STEM background in natural resource science. But I don't know that it would be considered STEM, so I think I'm still able to speak. But then, and after that, I did other things. But so I guess that's, and eventually I did wind up back in the impact investing space. Also, again, in a role that it was closer to what I was interested in, because I had put a slightly finer point on it, but maybe not fine enough. And so I guess that's the first piece of advice. The first thing that I would do differently is, even if it's not setting a 5 or 10 or 15-year goal, like a huge goal, set specific short-term goals. That'd be one thing. The second thing, which kind of almost is a counterpoint, or the other side to the coin, this I think I have done really well, or almost to a fault, is being open to new opportunities, being open to that plan changing. And so with respect to my current job, working at the intersection of climate and business at this giant company that I didn't think that I would ever work at. When I was working at the small company just before it, the impact investment startup, in a client engagement role, not in an investor role, I wound up focusing really heavily on strategic climate investment programs and building those out with large organizations. And then just so happened that what I was focusing on was something that this other startup was interested in, and they reached out to me, and I wound up joining that little startup, and they got acquired by this big company. And then I thought, oh man, this is going to be a mess. But it hasn't been a mess, and I've been able to figure out a way to make it work. So I think that having that openness to other opportunities is equally as important as having specific goals regardless of the time horizon of that goal.
That sounds like a good example of that chemistry theme of like dissolves like. So what Mike was saying is that his goals were general, and therefore his outcome was general. And then in a later point in time in your career, you had more specific goals that ended up in specific outcomes. So, for people out there who are thinking of how to leverage your background, right? You have to say to yourself, it's what is the euphemism? How do you bite an elephant, right? One bite at a time. We're talking about specific goals, making it just a little more measurable. That way you can celebrate your achievements and you can keep on propelling yourself forward. And then some things that our panelists have mentioned just now are, Natasha mentioned about an energy efficiency license. Mike mentioned about a natural resources course and or degree. Sorry, I'm not sure if I got the noun right? There's some sort of preparation that has to happen when it comes to being a non-STEMmer and going into the sustainability field. Or for that matter, just being someone without that perfectly empirically translatable experience needed for the job that you want. So again, I'll open this up to our panel members, but what worked for you in terms of education and your informational resources? For example, Green Home NYC was an informational resource for me. I actually have a best friend here. She's right behind you, sir. Her name is Joyce, not to put her on the spot. But we were college friends, and we wanted jobs that had nothing to do with our background. So for us, we're thinking to ourselves, oh my goodness, how do I get on the same level playing field as everyone else? So I joined a volunteer group. Joyce does a lot of volunteer group in her spare time too. What was your version of that?
Mine was really just trial by fire. As I mentioned, I was working in a role that was strategic communications, and then I switched into a marketing role. So that might not mean a lot to people in the audience right now, but there are differences in what the day-to-day of those jobs looked like. So number one, that was a difference that I had to adjust to, although it wasn't a big leap. The bigger leap was going from being steeped in public health issues to energy efficiency. And although I did not receive a license, I as soon as I was brought into that role, and even in the months leading up to it, it took a little while to make that transition. I just started spending time reaching out to the people who I knew were going to be my colleagues. I had that benefit because it was an internal transfer, so I was in the office with them, even though I wasn't directly working on the same project work with them. And I asked them for resources. I asked them for book recommendations or for industry publications, for organizations to follow. I held kind of informal informational interviews with people who were more on the technical side of the house, what we call our program implementers, the energy engineers who are really getting into like these heat pump systems that we have in the room, and explaining the benefits. And also, again, the energy efficiency industry is a very niche industry, and there was a lot that I had to also learn about and understand, asking other people who are more senior than I am, and not being afraid to ask. Like, they understood that I was transitioning, there was going to be a learning curve. And I'm very lucky that I had that support network that was willing to, spend a little time educating me and sharing resources so that I could understand how does this market work, because it's not necessarily something you can just Google. So that was incredibly valuable. And then just jumping into the project work, my transition happened like from the public health field into the energy efficiency field right as the pandemic started. I think my official start date was like February 14th, 2020. Nobody's counting. But it was a nerve-wracking time, to be honest, more so because of the other stuff that was going on and how that affected my job. But what ended up happening was, the contract I was hired to start on was delayed for a very long time. And so in the interim period, rather than working on this New York City contract that I have been working on now for the last 2.5 years, I spent 6 months working on a bunch of different energy efficiency programs that my company works on. And it was a really excellent learning opportunity because I got to be exposed to different programs that we ran. I got to interact with many different people within my company, managers at different levels, different sorts, and it exposed me to all of the nuances, not all, but many of the nuances within the market. And rather than, I was nervous about job security at the time just because there was a lot of uncertainty with COVID, et cetera. But rather than let that overwhelm, my mission, which was to successfully make this career transition, I took the situation that I was put in, and I just decided to put everything that I had into excelling. And a few years later, I'm happy to say that went well. And I've had some career progression since then. But I think, being open, I think hardship sometimes can provide good learning opportunities, and not being afraid to ask people who are more senior or maybe who you don't even know that well for advice, because more likely than not, they're willing to help people who are interested in transitioning into a new career.
So overall, people are welcoming to the idea that you are new, you are pivoting into this sector, you don't know what you're doing, but we're here to help you. Is that kind of what I'm gathering?
Absolutely. If you show that willingness that, hey, I have some questions, I'm trying to navigate all of this newness, I think the goodwill that you show, if you show that you're very interested and dedicated, you'll take the time to dig into the advice that they give you more. They're more than willing to help you out.
Any other thoughts, Annie?
Just to kind of jump off of that, I think when I was younger, it was certainly harder for me to wrap my head around asking for help, and it just cannot relay enough how much people appreciate it. They would much rather you ask them to explain, a project or a product, rather than you going off loosey-goosey and doing what you think is best. The part of the reason why I love what I do is because it enables me to learn something new every day. One of the best jobs I ever had was working at an agency that just focused on manufacturing and industrial clients. So my clients were spring manufacturers and gasket manufacturers and bolts, nuts, all of the tiny things that you see make up all of the big things that you use every single day. Now, when I think of nuts and bolts, I don't necessarily think, oh shit, marketing, let's knock this one out. But I will say that if you can commit yourself to asking the right questions and becoming an expert within the field that you work in, there's nothing that's going to stop you. I really also kind of come from an era where when right out of school, recruiters would tell me, oh, don't refer to yourself as Annie, and make sure that when you go to the hairdresser, you have them flat iron your hair. And I you have to bet on yourself, and you have to carry that through. The other thing is that you can't do it alone. You have to have friends, you have to have partners, you have to have coworkers that you can lean on to make those moves happen. So yeah, I think bet on yourself and ask questions.
I'll try to briefly, and not say that we all have to answer every question, but to maybe try to synthesize, I think a couple thoughts that I had. One, yeah, in particular in this space, sustainability, green jobs, climate, whatever label you want to put on it, or whichever lens you're looking through, this is a really friendly space as far as industries go. And it's wild that there is now a climate industry or a sustainability industry, but there is. And so I think that folks are on average more receptive than averages at having those conversations in other industries, but generally people I think want to help and want to pay it forward, but particularly in this space. Maybe a counterpoint or just a different way of looking at it is, or to get tactical from my experience on the kind of betting on yourself, is to take time to actually do the self-assessment, right, of why do I want to do this thing, or how do I define my goal, going back to specificity. And then if it's generic or you're not able to put a finer point on it, ask, well, why do I want to do it? And then if that answer is still generic, then ask, well, why do I want to do that next step? And to kind of go through a 5 whys until you get to some kernel where you're looking at it and you say, okay, I get it. I can tell someone else very specifically why I want to do this next thing, and then do a lot of homework around that thing, and then try to map whatever you've learned to whatever your skills are, and tell the story to yourself almost of how I'd say, okay, here's all the ways I'm qualified to do this very specific thing that I want to do. And then when you recognize the 2 or 3 ways in which you're not, that's the gap. And then you have to try to figure out how to bridge the gap. And that could be through self-learning, that could be through networking. But I think that it can be really hard, or I at least struggled tremendously earlier in my career, putting a finer definition on things, doing that gap analysis. And I think what I did earlier was, well, I want to go from here to here. The first here is where I was. The second here was pretty broadly defined. And the first thing that I thought of, it was like grad school. Okay, I got to do it. I got to go to grad school. I didn't actually talk to that many people. I didn't really vet that decision. I invested a lot into something that was a great experience, but maybe I wouldn't have had to do if I had been a little bit more willing to put in that upfront reflection, analysis, and then talking to folks and doing more homework. And so I think that there's a way to be really entrepreneurial about that transition, whatever it is. But yeah, be honest with yourself, get specific, get tactical, and then when you have to make big investments, then you'll know that you've at least done that homework up front.
He said get tactical. I just want to point that out. That was good. Yeah, so this is a non-STEM focused conversation that we are having, right? So most of our panelists, not most, all of our panelists have alluded to some of their day-to-day, right? A lot about your background, education, the ways in which they got to where they are now, and sort of what they do, right, from a 5,000-foot view. So, who here has been in an interview where someone asked you a question about experience that you knew had nothing to do with the job that you were going for? Guys, come on. Come on, higher. Okay. All right, exactly, right? So Mike kind of alluded to hey, know what you know, but then the stuff that you don't know, you gotta be tactical about it. You gotta attack that, right? So for those people in the audience, I'm not gonna ask you the question, I'm gonna ask them the question, right? But for those instances in your interviews where, you were asked, so how does your background, Lucy, how does your background in Italian, I think you're the one who majored in Italian, was it you?
Double major, yeah.
Oh, double major, right? So Lucy, how does speaking Italian help us in being the vice president of PowerFlex, right? You're gonna say to yourself, okay, irrelevant, but let me answer this question thoughtfully and tactfully, right? So, you heard it from our audience, right? What is maybe a instance or scenario where you were asked about your experience and it clearly came from a place of, is this part of the job that we are looking to employ, what's the word, I'm forgetting the word, that we're looking to hire for, right? It's happened to me before, right? And then I had to find a creative way of not pointing out the flaws in my resume, but making my flaws a positive thing, or somehow finding that way of saying, oh, no, I do this, but here's why you need me, or like, here's why my experience makes sense to the job I am applying for. So what are some examples or scenarios or stories of your interview woes and those imposter syndrome moments where you thought, uh-oh, they found a hole, how am I gonna get out of it? Feel free to take a moment of that long-winded question.
I can only speak, from a less so a sustainability standpoint, more so a marketing standpoint. And I think that if there are other marketers in the room, you run into this a lot. Somebody, your interviewee is obsessed with Twitter, obsessed. All they want to do is talk about the B2B strategy on getting more pickup on Twitter, more retweets. They want to go viral. That's actually not as easy or as important as a lot of people think. And so when I get sort of flagged with like an armchair expert, and they are certainly the ones who are conducting the interviews nowadays, you just have to be humble, right? Oh, well, I've actually found that Twitter is not so great as far as referral traffic to the website. LinkedIn has a better click-through rate, and so that's why I focused in there. I'm interested to hear more about what you think this tool is going to be able to do for us. So in the example of Lucy, and you're Italian, well, I'm not sure that I'd use this on a day-to-day, but if by chance we have an Italian client, I will be there to explain the execution process to them. And you want to make people, you don't want to make people feel stupid, but you also want to make sure that they understand that that is a very small part of what this whole thing is. And you can't be rude to interviewers. You want the job, you got to get that money every other week. But you have to be polite, and you want to make them feel good about the conversation that you have. I think, especially when I was starting out, in particular with PowerFlex, a million years ago, was actually Enter Solar, and I got hired as a HubSpot consultant to take a look at their database and also to redesign their website. And at the time, it wasn't like a mobile optimized thing, and our CEO would sit across from me in the conference room and bang his fist on the desk and say, Google doesn't get me leads, it doesn't get me customers, it doesn't get me projects, it doesn't get me anything. And I know very well that it could, but I have to explain to him in a way that he's able to understand and to see the value. And I think that actually takes up a lot more energy, especially in like a day-to-day environment. When the larger the organization, the more folks you have to kind of walk through your rationale to. But spin it and make them feel good about the question that they're asking, and then ask them to explain to you why they feel that way. Oh, why is it important for me to know Italian, and do you know something about this position that I don't? I'd love to hear more about why it's important.
That was excellent. Speaking of Italian, Mike, you now have to
Oh my
tell
God.
us about your,
Oh my God.
about your experience.
So, by the way, I've been sitting here feeling terrible because you said that, and then I was like, oh, double major. The reason I said that, not to be arrogant, was because I didn't want anyone to put me on the spot for Italian. So we're talking to me in Italian. My other major is history.
We won't make you do it.
Good.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't have a terrible amount to add. I think, like, just speaking from experience, I've never gone from one industry. The next job has never been in the same industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just testament to the fact that you really can spin anything. And it is really hard to go from something that is, I think that a helpful framework is to think about industry and function. And it's really hard to switch both at once. It's much easier to focus on switching one at a time, or at least a small step within one and a big step within the other. Sometimes you do want to switch both, and I think in that case that might require something additional. I mean, for example, going from like pre-grad school, post-grad school, I don't think that with the experience I had, I didn't know that I was going to go into management consulting, which is what I did after grad school, but I wouldn't have been able to do that without the degree I had based on the experience that I had. That was too big of a shift. But to go from working in like philanthropic impact investing, which is the startup that I was at before, where I was able to focus on building climate investing programs and build out a knowledge base around current issues in climate investment and climate technology, and then have a climate risk analytics firm reach out to me. That was something I was able to bridge. So I wasn't switching. It was a little bit of an industry switch. It was not a functional switch. I went from business development to business development. So I had all of the different, examples I had around first client engagement and then business development, which are closely related, and I was able to take that. So switching is really important. Switching industry or function is usually easier than switching both. If you're going to switch both, size them both up and figure out, again, based on gap analysis, do I think I need some sort of a third-party validator or investment here? Can I do it myself? Can I do it effectively or cost-effectively? Do I need to reach out to others? If not, then what other levers can I pull?
That reminds me of a book I read a couple years ago called Mission Transition, where the author goes into, tips on, the interview process, but also your mentality as you make the switch. And she focused a lot on, okay, is it an industry switch or is it a function switch? And then exactly how he put it in very risk analysis appropriate terms, right? You're going to find the gap and you're going to work in making specific goals to fill that gap. So appreciate that thought there.
Yeah.
Do you have any fun stories before
I don't know about fun stories, but I think just one thing that comes to mind is when you are preparing, I've had it before where I went for an interview and the job they started describing to me was different than the posting that I read.
Ooh.
That's a big red flag, honestly. That says disorganization and poor communication between different departments, which, as somebody with a background in marketing and communications, that's a no-go for me. Everyone's different, but I think, just to prepare for the interview, something that I've found really helpful and effective is reminding yourself about the things that you've accomplished and overcome. So if you feel like there is an area, let's say in the job description, there's an area where you think the interviewer may probe you on that, in advance of your interview, think about some scenarios and stories you may want to tell when they get to that part of the interview, if you can anticipate it. Obviously, sometimes they might throw you a curveball and that's not possible. You have to kind of think on your feet. But something that I think can be really valuable is using the STAR method. I'm going to try to remember, see if I can get this right.
Oh.
Situation. What is the T?
What's
the
T?
I can't remember the
Task.
T. Task.
Situation task.
I think it's like analysis and resolution or something, assessment and resolution, something along those lines. We can Google it later. But the general idea is to tell a story of your experience and make it relatable. So, for example, if you're going for an interview and they want to know, what is your website design experience? And maybe you worked on a website 5 years ago and you haven't really touched it since. What are you going to tell them, if that's a part of the job description, what are you going to tell them that, that you're capable? Maybe you want to say, you want to be transparent. I haven't worked on website in a professional setting in XYZ years, but I've been working on this passion project and I'm a really quick learner, or something along those lines. So remembering, don't let the imposter syndrome take over and frame your narrative in a positive light.
For any Green Home member here, if you can just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down when we're about 20 minutes, right, till. Because it's almost been an hour, which is crazy. So thanks, guys. I apologize I don't have water for Annie or Natasha. Poor moderator I am. Mike is good to go
I'm
here.
sorry.
No, it's all good. So some burning questions, at least that I have, but I'm sure some of the audience member have as well, is like, you know what, I just want to know more about what they do. Like, what is their day-to-day? Why do they like their job so much? Out of the three of you, who has worked at your current job the longest? Or, framed differently, what job have you held the longest?
I've been with the PowerFlex organization for 6 years total, 4 years full-time in March.
Okay, Natasha?
I've been at ICF for 7 years, but in this role for 3.
1 year and 1 month.
1 year and 1 month.
1 year
Okay.
and 1 month.
Safe to say, right, they like what they do, I think, and they've been at their jobs for a while. So while Wilts were searching for these dream jobs in the sustainability sector, we're pivoting into an industry that we're not familiar with. What will make you stay at this job, right? What are those things that make you happy to be at work every day? And thank you, Katie, coming in clutch there. Or rather, what is something about your day-to-day that you just like look forward to most?
I love my team. I love my team. I think that they're all real smart and really good at what they do. We've been through 4 website redesigns and 3 mergers, and we just have a good time together. We respect one another, and it makes it way easier to show up every day and certainly to sign online every day if you like the people that you work with. Now, outside of my immediate team, those people can get lost. I'm just kidding. That's not true.
Lucy, cover your ears.
It also helps when you work with really smart, passionate people, right? If you feel good about the work that you're doing and you like the people that you work with and you're in sustainability, I just feel like it's impossible to feel bad about showing up and doing what you need to do every day. And like we've all sort of indicated, this industry has really changed a lot in a very short period of time. If you had told me that we would be where we are now 6 years ago when I came in as a consultant, I would have been like, yeah, right. But it's crazy. We have grown in massive ways, and we just keep hiring more smart, talented people.
Mhm. Someone once told me, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're wrong.
That's it.
And that's what that reminds me of.
Yeah. Same, honestly. I do really love the people that I work with, but I also appreciate that in my organization there are lots of opportunities to expand out beyond my immediate team. Also, as I mentioned, my little crash course in energy efficiency exposed me to a lot of different people within the organization. I've stayed in touch with them through a variety of different channels, and I think it's the corporate culture. There are lots of resources to grow professionally, whether those are, taking on more responsibility within the company or actually learning opportunities, like taking advantage of, a few years ago I took a digital marketing certificate that was paid for through my company because it was directly applicable to my day-to-day job. I also love that I'm an events manager because I love to not have to be sitting at my desk every single day. I get to switch it up sometimes and get out into the community and speak to people and tell them about our services. It's essentially the main function of my job is letting New Yorkers know that this service is available, this city service is available to them. And I really enjoy being able to engage with the people who will ultimately use our services and hear from them firsthand how they found out about us. Is our marketing working? What they liked, what they think we can improve upon, and then take those learnings back to my team. One other thing I'll just mention is that in my role, I sit between I serve as the liaison between the marketing team and the program implementation team or the outreach team, essentially the people who are day-to-day actually delivering technical assistance to building owners, helping them figure out how to make their buildings more efficient. And I think that keeps things interesting because in my day-to-day, I'm not just talking to my 5 colleagues on the marketing team, I'm engaging with dozens of people every day, so most of my days look pretty different.
I like hearing that. I was asked at a meeting today, what are other companies doing as far as hybrid work, right? Like we're at WSP where I work now, we're 2 to 3 days a week, you need to be in the office. And my boss was asking me, and that phone call you were on the other day, were you able to ask them what is their hybrid model like? And turns out, I found out from some companies that, hey, they're doing 5 days a week for 6 months for all newcomers to the industry. So I thought to myself, gee, that's interesting, because as someone who's new to a company, what do new people need? They need some mentorship. They need to be around the people, the experts, the subject matter experts, to be the best programmer, to be the best engineer, to learn the templates, the documentations to use, and to simply just have that oversight where, we feel safe in doing something alone, knowing that there's a safety net, i.e. that subject matter expert there to catch us when we fall. So real quick down the line, are you remote? Are you in person? Are you hybrid?
Hybrid.
Hybrid?
Hybrid, but mostly remote, except for the in-person engagements and maybe a day or two, and I feel like going into the office.
Very nice, Annie.
Remote, but transitioning to more hybrid.
Okay. And do we prefer remote versus in-person, hybrid? How has hybrid helped you not only enjoy your job, but excel at your job?
Certainly going into an office, especially as we start to ramp up in that capacity and people are feeling more comfortable making the going actually physically into an office. Collaboration, way better when you can talk to somebody and you're not sort of plagued with Teams messages and sort of not able to get through your email in order to have more creative conversation. Being in front of someone makes it very hard to get distracted in that capacity. There are certainly going to be days where I miss rolling out of bed and throwing on my meeting shirt is what I would call it at the time. I'm going to miss those days, but I also think that there's real value not only in the collaboration, but separating home from work a little bit more. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but my office changes depending on where I'm at, and the inconsistency there definitely makes me less productive. And it's just nice to be able to say, all right, my work computer's staying in the office today, and I'm going to go home, and I'm not going to think about this until I show back up into the office the next day. I think we've definitely all been doing the remote thing for a long enough time where I certainly am sort of aching for that little bit of disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually working remote for a little bit before the pandemic started, and I was so excited to have my desk. And as I said, I started in this role right at the start of the pandemic. I got my desk, and then 2 weeks later, I went on vacation, and then 2 weeks later, everything shut down. I was so sad. I had to put all my little pictures up. I appreciate being able to engage with other employees who are on totally different teams and projects. There's also a feeling of camaraderie. There are people who are coming in from Long Island, from Westchester. Most people are based in the city, and our office is not so far from here, but there's a social club. They're essentially monthly activities that people are just volunteering to organize, and that's really nice. You go into the office, you see all these familiar faces. It's just a nice change of scenery, and I don't have to worry about the cars on my street honking about alternate side parking.
I agree with everything that's been said. The only thing that I would add, and this is for me personally, but it's accountability. I mean, I like what I do, and it's pretty demanding, but I'm also just honestly a very easily distracted person, a huge multitasker to a fault. That's not good for work. When I'm at work, I'm just working exclusively. I'm in an open office, 2 monitors, surrounded by tons of people, and all I do is work. I'm not getting a package delivered or making something a little more interesting for lunch. I'll have had to make that the night before or the day before, whatever. So I think that the focus and the accountability is huge for me.
I bring this all up to say that for the non-STEM folks in here, right, when you pick your dream job, your dream industry, your dream function, is there a hybridization model at that company is something you're gonna have to think about. And for me, I came from somewhere where there was no hybrid model. You showed up to work every day. So when I pivoted to WSP and I was like, oh my gosh, people work from home. Oh my gosh, there's Oracle timesheets. Oh my gosh, I have to put in my hours and how I spend it. oh God, I put a load of laundry in, uh-oh, like how do I charge that to my Oracle timesheet? It was just this weird anxiety that I had, and I didn't understand the value behind hybrid model until I, fast forward to now, where I say to myself, it's kind of nice when I get to sleep in till, 8, vice getting up at 5:30 in the morning to get a workout in and then head onto the train. I live in Yonkers, by the way, you mentioned Winchester. Additionally, right, there's such value in being around people and mentors to ask those questions and to get that extra help going. So long story short, I didn't realize how important hybrid was, at least for me, and also learning a little bit more about myself as far as, hey, what's the best productive area and how is she gonna get her work done? So that was the reason behind that question. And Harris gave me the pseudo thumbs up that we're just about at that 15 to 20 minute mark for Q&A. So at this point in time, right, the victims are up here, they're all yours. What questions do we got? And it really can be anything, right? For example, I really hope someone asks Mike about like what actually he does, because I just think it's really cool and I want to hear more about it. But you catch my drift, like what are we thinking out in the audience?
I have one question.
Yeah.
For interview. For example, I'm trying to do this transition in my career. So do you have any example of someone that you recently hired that was with a totally different background that you were looking for, and what made this person stand out to you?
So her question, just for those in the back that may not hear, right? Who is someone that you recently hired with a particular background, and what'd you think of them, and how did you respond to that?
Are we talking function and industry? Or just one of those elements?
For example, because for someone that you're like in a transition, you select these other requirements, and most of the times, for me, for example, if you don't check all the boxes, sometimes I feel like, should I send my resume or not? Have any example that someone that didn't check all the boxes, and you're like, oh, and you hire this person instead of you hire someone that check all the boxes, and what's the difference with this person? Makes you
So
hire.
someone who checks the boxes versus someone who doesn't, and why?
Yeah.
I don't have a recent example.
I don't have a recent example for my team. My partner used to work in hotel management, and he wanted to stop doing that and pursue a digital marketing role. He flooded himself with certificates and hunkered down and was Google certified and platform certified. And what he has found has been successful is just, relaying the facts. I used to work in the hotel industry. I am actively pursuing a digital marketing. Here's what I've made the investment in to show you how enthusiastic I am about it. I think, especially as we kind of continue, at least on the marketing side, it's not always 100% necessary that you have a degree at all. It's really about showing up and saying, here I am, I'm enthusiastic, I'm a hard worker, I have already invested this time in myself to try and make this function or industry change. I unfortunately haven't hired somebody in a while, so it's a little out of my purview, but.
I'm thinking back, this was a few years ago, so I guess it's not so recent, but there was somebody who was working on my team who previously had been working in the publishing industry, so totally not related to sustainability, and there was certainly a learning curve when she started in the role, but she had some transferable skills, like writing skills, to keep it super basic, writing, and some analytical skills that she demonstrated within her resume, her cover letter. And so first of all, I just want to say, even if you don't check every box, you should still totally try submitting your resume. The other thing is, I've heard this a lot, and I think it's really valuable to not use the same resume for every job application, because there are going to be different things that they pick out. So So one thing is like kind of have a master resume where you kind of are listing out like all of the different things that you do and, you know, some metrics that you can point to. And then based on the position that you are applying to, customize that. But something else that I heard very recently in the Wall Street Journal's Future of Work podcast, recommend giving that a listen, is any kudo that you've ever received wherever you are, you should file away in some special kudos folder somewhere, because then when you're going and you're applying to a position, you feel like this imposter syndrome is coming over and you're like, maybe I'm not the right fit and I shouldn't even bother applying because it's not gonna work out. Look at your kudos list. It's gonna make you feel better about yourself and remind you about things that you've accomplished. And then also you might find some things that you can, you know, report back on or use for your application, your cover letter, your resume.
Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. The gentleman right behind you, feel free to also say your name when you ask a question so we can acknowledge you correctly.
Hello, my name is Paul. I've been to a couple of Green Room events, but I know Paul and Katie.
Mm-hmm.
And this question is kind of more geared toward Natasha. I think I talked to you before.
Hi, yeah. We hosted events in your space.
Yeah. And I know you said that you were, in your current role, you had some professional development, and you took some courses, and you started taking on responsibilities. Do you feel like there was a kind of thought process? Like, what was you saw like, oh, there's an open role, or did you kind of write down things that you wanted to do within your company, or some ways that you wanted to expand, and you started talking to your peers, or how did that growth process happen?
Yeah, so one of the areas that I knew I wanted to do for a while, and something that I'm still working on now, one of them was people management. This is broadly like not even specific to sustainability, but I wanted to work on people management and project management. So within my organization, there are like in-house learning opportunities and then external learning opportunities. So in terms of people management, almost any time I see that there's a course that is offered around people management, I'll talk to my manager about it to make sure she's okay with me taking a little bit of time on the side to grow my career in that way, and it's usually fine. So then I sign up and I participate in those courses. Same for project management. I'm registered for a course later this summer that's about expanding my leadership role, because I've been growing my career within this organization and I want to continue doing that. And then the other thing is I have they're kind of like unofficial mentors, just people I really look up to within the company who every single time I speak to them, whether it's brainstorming for a marketing strategy or working on a business development proposal, I'm just inspired by them, and I've taken time to just catch up with them. I don't know if sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's more sporadic than that, but we have ongoing projects, and so we'll check in. And when they share opportunities, sometimes I'll see an opportunity, I'll say, hey, what do you think about this? And then they encourage me to go for it, or vice versa. Like I mentioned, I got a digital marketing certificate. That was one of these people who I really look up to mentioned, she was aware of this certificate and she mentioned it to me, and I took a look at my schedule, my workload, and the time commitment, and I said, yeah, it's gonna take some extra hours, but I'm gonna do it, and I really got a lot out of that.
Answer your question? Okay.
So you had mentioned, I'm Seth, by the way, you were in food service and then you sort of transitioned out of that into the professional role, and that's sort of where I'm at. I have a non-STEM degree in sustainability, but all my work experience, except for like an internship, is bartending. And it just seems like I can't even get interviews because when I send an resume, it's 20 years of bartending or whatever. And do you have any advice on like how to frame my resume to sort of get an interview or
Yeah, that's, so I will say that I didn't have 20 years of food service experience when I was doing this. I had been doing it full time for a couple of years. And I think that, so I don't know if my experience is relevant, but I'll just, candidly just kind of give advice. I think there are a couple things that you could do to minimize the friction, I would say, right? In terms of the bias that these reviewers have when they're saying, well, we want to see experience that is exactly what we understand and not this thing that to us seems very incongruent. One could be, so I'm just thinking off the top of my head, one of my best friends worked in food service. I actually ran beverage programs and was behind the bar for almost 10 years. He did wind up going to grad school, but I think even if he hadn't, he now works in a corporate role, but at a beverage company, at a really large wine company, many of which have robust sustainability programs. So I think that doing that industry alignment and being like, I'm coming from food and beverage, is there an interesting role within it? But you probably have already done this and.
Well, it makes sense because my focus in my degree
Mhm.
is simple food and agriculture.
Great.
So
Yeah.
it does make.
That would be the first thing. Yeah, it's exactly. Like trying to align where you're applying so that there's at least an initial kind of like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm sure that a lot of people that work, well, it depends on the company. Some of them will have food service backgrounds, others will have never been behind a bar, obviously. But, and then I think it's a matter of saying, like thinking back to that gap analysis. I mean, you're doing the degree, amazing. Are there any things that are lower cost, shorter investment of time that are very specific with regard to like take an Excel course or like super specific things that are relevant to the type of role that you're trying to get into? Put those at the top of your resume. Like before listing out all the experience, basically be like, here's who I am, there's a summary section, here's everything I'm bringing to the table from a skill standpoint. Obviously translate all of the customer facing skills. I mean, still the best customer service experience like training I've ever had has been working on the floor of a restaurant ever. And then getting abused in the kitchen by people, and then coming back out and then putting on a happy face for customers. Yeah, so I would just say like put that all up front, have them read it, and they're like, wow, this guy's amazing. And then you say, I have 20 years of experience doing this, and they say, okay, but filter through the lens of what you just told me. That's really attractive. So that's what I would do.
Very helpful.
Yep.
Arthur, and you spoke earlier. My question is for Mike. I want to know what a typical day for you is like. How is it structured? What types of challenges do you encounter? And does that fluctuate radically from day to day?
It depends on where we're at in the year, actually. So this is something that I struggle with a little bit. And I've only been in my job, like my co-panelists here, certainly I think they have more depth in their careers, and so I don't want to take up too much airspace, but I've only been doing it for a year or so. What it is in a nutshell, just trying to like put some context around it in a sentence, is the company that was acquired that I joined initially does climate risk analytics, meaning that there's a team of climate scientists and researchers, and they essentially model how the climate's going to change over time. And then there's a separate team of like economists basically that take those climate models and then plug them into essentially like damage functions that they have built, assessing the vulnerability of different physical structures to different climate hazards. So how will coastal flooding affect a high-rise office building? How will extreme temperature affect an alfalfa crop? Or that's another type of real asset. So we look at hundreds of different types of assets and 10 or so, 8 to 10 hazards, and then do very detailed modeling between them. I am not on the science side because I don't have a real STEM background. And I'm on the business development side. And so like right now, this is the part of the year that I think is the most interesting. This is the actual go-to-market strategy part of the year where I have a new mandate, a new role this year, which is great, different team, focused on financial institutions in North America, so US and Canada, focused on climate risk analytics, bespoke kind of sustainability, almost like consulting type solutions, and then benchmarking, which is its own thing, but whatever. Let's just talk about climate analytics. Right now is the part of the year where we get to say, what does this market look like? So splitting it into a what we the different types of customer segments and making sure that they're I don't know a better way to say, like, mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, meaning like all of them, but they're all different, right? Like, we don't want any overlap. We want to make sure we have the whole universe, making sure that there are few enough of them that it's reasonable to target them individually, but enough such that we can get really specific, defining different personas, putting together different product packages, doing the pricing strategy, sizing the market, doing all that awesome fun analysis stuff. And then that plan then actually has to work. And then it really should have all been done by now, but whatever. Post, when it's done, then actually the days, they're different in that you're talking to different clients. You're getting meetings with prospective clients, and you're presenting, before you present the solutions, learning more about the type of work that they're doing, which could be, I have a big loan portfolio and it's collateralized by different assets, and I want to understand the risk to those assets. They would never say that. They would say, hey, we do loans, why are we talking about climate? And then we would say, because loans are collateralized by assets, and assets get affected by the climate, and let's talk about that. But it's frankly a lot of the same conversation, because we're talking about the same types of solutions. And so I really like this part up front. I really like engaging with clients and trying to map what they're trying to do with something I think is cool. I chafe a little bit against the monotony of talking about the same thing over and over again. So that's just something that I have to deal with.
Can you share your day too? Sure. And what you like about it? Go first.
It's a lot of meetings, to be honest, which is why I like the days when I get to just be out at events. But I typically have there are a lot of status check-ins on different projects. Our universe, our target audience is pretty large. There's over 1 million buildings in New York City. We are not tasked with consulting with every single one of those buildings, but we are tasked with assisting around 6,000 buildings. That's still a lot of people who we need to make real decisions and real changes that are hard to make. So how do we do that? Like I said, we have to let them know that the service is available to take advantage of, and we do that through a variety of different marketing campaigns. But it's also pretty technical. There are a lot of different organizations and partners that we need to be in touch with and collaborating with. Other city agencies. We need to make sure we're aware of what the legislation is in the market, and that our messaging is up to date with the latest legislation. And there are, within energy efficiency, there are seasonalities. There are different building systems you're going to be looking at during different times of the year. And so there are a lot of strategy meetings, and then I actually carve out time within my day-to-day to have time to just do the work, whether it's writing a press release or a campaign brief or actually developing the marketing materials. Like I said, lots of calls with partners to plan events, put together the decks for those events, try to do outreach in different boroughs, and then making sure that there are a lot of different types of needs that we are trying to address, and a lot of different sub-audiences within our large target audience. And so our messages need to be different to resonate with those different audiences. Plus, as consultants for the city, we have to make sure we're meeting our clients' needs and expectations. So there are a lot of different pieces that we're juggling, and that's why I say that I'm never bored, because there's usually probably like 10 different projects going on, even if they're smaller projects. And one thing I'll just say that I started instituting is we have a very meeting-heavy culture, and that can make it challenging to just sit down and do the work. So I've started to at least attempt implementing no meeting Fridays. So I have just blocked for the indefinite future Fridays off of my calendar, so people are not even gonna really try requesting meetings with me on Fridays, because I'm busy all day doing the work.
That sounds like a good strategy, to be honest.
I highly recommend it.
I start every day with a 30-minute stand-up with my team, where we all identify the 5 things we're going to try and do that day. And it doesn't matter if on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday the same 2 things are on that list. I'm not here to make make sure they get done, but so that we all have aligned priorities, so that we can make sure that we're hitting our due dates and timelines. I'm also one of those people who signs on first thing in the morning and like with a cup of coffee, making sure that all of our analytics look right and that nothing went down overnight and that I don't have to worry about creating some report at the end of the month with a big caveat. I hate that, so we're gonna make sure that that doesn't happen. And then again, it's very meeting heavy. In the last year, almost 2 years, we've become an organization that not only does solar, but now we do EV and solar plus storage, and we have software and products and technologies that we didn't have previously. And so a lot of my time is spent making sure that I'm talking to product owners and subject matter experts to understand exactly what marketing materials they're going to need. We're also in the middle of a website redesign, so there's a ton of sprints happening where we're all trying to make sure that we're hitting a schedule. But I have found that in lieu of having like a bi-weekly design meeting or a weekly team meeting, that these little tiny kick our day off with the 5 things that we're all gonna hit for that day has made us a lot more productive than sort of sitting in an hour-long call where we kind of shoot the shit and nobody talks about what the things that they actually need to do are. So now they know you wake up, put together your 5 things. Doesn't matter if they're the same 5 things all week. We just have to see some sort of progress.
I think there's time for one more question. Any takers? Yeah.
I'm Tamara. I have a question about the industry shift without like a function shift. Looking to transition. I'm in communications and marketing and a nonprofit, looking to transition to green energy. And I have focused, my approach has been focusing on my skill sets and showing that I'm qualified for the role because it's mirrored in function. But I guess I wonder, is there a value in putting more emphasis than I have been on the volunteer work I've done in the green space? Like how much weight does it actually hold as compared to I check most things on the list? So because I've been kind of downplaying the volunteer part.
As somebody who has like retained the function and moved throughout the industries, and to work off Natasha's note on not using the same resume, you want a job in sustainability, have your sustainability resume where you do call those things out. There's no clearer way conversation starter, especially when you're in an interview in an industry you maybe not have worked in before, to say, well, I don't have a ton of professional experience, but I have dedicated X amount of hours and have saw through 3 or 4 different volunteer projects that do hit those marks. I also find, and I know people are sort of wishy-washy on cover letters. I think that that's a great way to call out the things that you want folks to look at within your resume. So I spent 5 years volunteering and I've run these events and I've learned X, Y, and Z. I think that that's always the right route.
I totally agree, and I think, depending on the size of the nonprofit you work in, my perception is that if you work in a nonprofit, you're probably wearing a lot of different hats, and that in itself is a skill, and it's a really valuable skill. So, don't forget to play that up and use that to your advantage. And just building off what Annie said, I think that you shouldn't underplay your volunteer experience, because the fact that you are taking your free time and spending that doing whatever it is that you're volunteering speaks volumes in itself. And if you have results that you can tie to the time, sometimes you might not, I might be able to tell you that I sold like 500 pounds of cheese in the last 2 months, but I don't know if anybody cares about that. But I think it's valuable to show that experience. Probably don't put it at the top of your resume, but you should bring it up, whether it's in your cover letter or make sure you mention it in even a first round interview, because I think that will stand out.
Definitely include it. Yeah, I just having, and I think this is ironically sometimes often true at smaller organizations that have fewer resources but that are more intentional about hiring. But at one of the last company I was at, I was part of the hiring team that built the the rubric for evaluation, and we tried really hard to remove bias from the initial screening process and did blind screening. But you know, it was a point-based rubric, and one of the sections was basically like demonstrated commitment to X, like our mission, what we were working on. And so it wasn't just a binary. Like you could actually get more points, and then there just wound up being a threshold at which we just interview people under a certain number of points. So absolutely, I mean, if it's not at the expense of something else, like a really hard skill that you have to show, yeah, totally, it's only going to help.
Well, round of applause for our panel members.